The Food is Health Revolution presents The Last Prescription. How direct-to-consumer food. Pharma ended the monetization of disease and created health span. But first, a disclaimer. This is a future cast, a fictional exploration of one possible future based on current trends and emerging technologies. While the companies and technologies mentioned are real, the events described are speculative fiction intended to help visualize potential outcomes. Like any forward-looking statement, actual results may vary significantly. This is not investment advice, predictive analysis, or a guarantee of future events. Consider it a thought experiment in what could be possible if current innovations in pharmaceutical distribution, food, agriculture, and health converge in transformative ways. Opening scene. October 15, 2038. Heartland Marts store number 1, Seward, Nebraska. Sarah Chen stood in the produce section of what had become America's most revolutionary grocery store, watching a grandmother select spinach. The woman didn't check her phone, didn't scan barcodes, didn't consult an app. She simply picked up the spinach labeled Brain Boost and placed them in her cart, after 13 years of innovation had made the right choice obvious and affordable.
Remember when we thought we needed to prescribe food like medicine? Turns out, when you make all the food healthy, you don't need maintenance pharmaceutical medications. You just need groceries.
Sarah asked Jake Wilson, the Nebraska farmer whose family had helped transform this former Kroger into the first Heartland Mart. Behind them, where the pharmacy once stood, a teaching kitchen hummed with activity. A former Pfizer scientist was showing locals how certain cooking methods enhanced the bioavailability of nutrients in their evening meal. So few prescriptions were being filled that pharmacies had become obsolete.
20 trillion in pharmaceutical revenue over 50 years. And it all changed when they realized the real money wasn't in managing and treating disease. It was in preventing it from ever happening,
Jake said, gesturing at the thriving store. Through the window, they could see the vertical farms that now supplied half the store's produce, growing varieties developed through a partnership between Eli Lilly, Indigenous tribes, and local farmers. The building next door, once a CVS, had been converted into a health spital where the last pharmacy benefit manager in Nebraska had recently become part of the HealthSpan Collective.
The middlemen never saw it coming. They were so busy managing sickness, they forgot that health was the real market. We were already paying for our prevention through our food purchases. We just needed the right food.
Sarah reflected. Chapter 1. The Catalyst Event. Washington, D.C., July 31, 2025. The revolution began not with protests or legislation, but with a simple realization in a Pfizer boardroom. Andrew Darling had just received a letter from the White House demanding direct-to-consumer drug prices must match most favored nations' prices. His first instinct was to resist. His second was to scheme. But his third instinct, the one that changed everything, was to question the fundamental premise of his industry.
What if we're in the wrong business? We spend billions developing drugs to treat diseases that could have been prevented or reversed with better nutrition. What if instead of competing with food, we partnered with it?
He asked his executive team. The room fell silent. For a century, pharmaceutical companies had operated on a simple model. Wait for people to get sick, then sell them treatment. The sicker the population, the higher the profits. It was a system that had made them rich but had yielded a chronic disease epidemic so crippling, those companies were now the villain and under insurmountable scrutiny. Meanwhile, in Seward, Nebraska, Jake Wilson was facing his own crisis. The fifth-generation farmer had watched commodity prices collapse as GLP-1 drugs reduced ultra-processed food consumption nationwide. His neighbors were going bankrupt, growing corn and soy that nobody wanted to buy.
We're growing the wrong stuff. We're producing calories when the world needs nutrition,
he told his wife over dinner. The connection between these two realizations would reshape America. Chapter 2. The Problem Recognition. Bentonville, Arkansas, September 2025. Maya Thompson, Walmart's head of health and wellness, stared at the data on her screen. The nation's largest retailer was watching its food sales plummet as GLP-1 drugs suppressed appetites, while its pharmacy revenues were being squeezed by new direct-to-consumer, most favored nations requirements, undermining the pharmacy benefits manager market.
We're being attacked from both sides. Less food volume, less drug margin. The only growth is in the 2% of our SKUs that are actually nutritious,
She told the board. But then she noticed something interesting in the outlier data. In stores where they'd piloted pharma zones, both categories were growing. These were sections designed to combat chronic disease with targeted disease protocols pairing specific foods with specific supplements. Customers picking up their diabetes medication were also buying specific vegetables that the on-site lifestyle medicine nutritionist recommended. The combination was working better than either alone. The real recognition came from Brightseed's AI platform, which had been analyzing the interaction between food compounds and pharmaceuticals.
There are 10,000 bioactive compounds in common foods and medicinal plants that can enhance or replace pharmaceutical interventions. We've been ignoring 99% of nature's pharmacy because we separated food and medicine into different aisles.
Li Che, Brightseed's CEO, presented findings that stunned the industry. Indigenous, the food testing company, added another piece of the puzzle. Their data showed that nutritional density in American food had declined 50% since 1950.
We're not facing a healthcare crisis. We're facing a nutrition crisis that's creating a healthcare crisis.
Eric Smith, their CEO, put it bluntly. Chapter 3. Early Innovations. Cincinnati, Ohio, January 2026. The pharmaceutical industry began to split into distinct paths. Some companies doubled down on acute care through infectious disease, cancer research, rare diseases, and emergency medicine, where their expertise in complex molecular interventions remained vital. But companies focused on maintenance medications and treatments for chronic disease faced an existential choice: evolve or disappear. Eli Lilly's chronic disease division made the first bold move, not by acquiring farms, but by partnering with indigenous communities in Peru who had been using medicinal plants for centuries.
We realized we'd been trying to reinvent what nature had already perfected. These communities knew which plants controlled blood sugar. We just needed to understand why,
Admitted their head of chronic disease research. Using AI that had reduced drug development costs by 90%, they applied pharmaceutical rigor to food science. Not to create new drugs to treat symptoms or new food formulations focused on hyperpalatability to drive more sales, but to understand how traditional foods achieved therapeutic effects. They discovered that purple corn from the Andes contained anthocyanins that mimicked GLP-1 effects, and that certain fermented foods produced peptides identical to those they'd been synthesizing in labs. Marcus Thompson, the regenerative farmer from West Virginia, found himself working with both Lilly and local Native American tribes.
The Lakota had been growing medicinal varieties of squash for generations. Lilly's scientists just helped us understand the mechanisms and optimize growing conditions. We weren't engineering new plants. We were rediscovering ancient wisdom,
Marcus explained. The collaboration went deeper than expected. Novo Nordisk's chronic division merged entirely with Danone to form Nourish HealthSpan, focusing on fermented foods and prebiotics. Pfizer partnered with indigenous communities across the nation and the Amazon to study how specific combinations of plants addressed mitochondrial dysfunction. They weren't trying to patent nature, they were trying to understand it and scale it.
Pharma brought analytical capabilities and quality control. Food companies brought taste and accessibility. Indigenous communities brought centuries of knowledge. Together, they made chronic disease obsolete, while bringing tribal economies back to life.
Tom Mitchell explained, as HealthShift provided the distribution model. Chapter 4. Scientific Breakthrough. Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, March 2026. The scientific breakthrough came not from creating new compounds, but from finally understanding ancient ones. Dr. Joseph Pizzorno's team, working with Indigenous healers and Merck's analytical division, mapped how traditional medicinal plants achieved their effects. They discovered that ashwagandha didn't just reduce stress, it contained compounds that repaired mitochondrial damage. Turmeric didn't just reduce inflammation, it activated the same pathways as expensive biologics.
We found that plants grown in healthy soil naturally produced the compounds we'd been trying to synthesize. A single medicinal mushroom contained prebiotics, peptides, and amino acids that together achieved what 5 different drugs were trying to do separately.
Pizzorno explained to a stunned scientific conference. The FDA, recognizing the shift, announced revolutionary new guidelines for chronic disease treatments.
For chronic conditions, we'll focus on safety and let the market measure outcomes. If fermented cabbage achieves the same HbA1c reduction as metformin, why require a billion-dollar approval process?
Commissioner Anthony Bourne explained. This regulatory change unleashed innovation. With AI reducing development costs by 95%, companies could test thousands of food-based interventions simultaneously. Microbiome research exploded. Fermentation techniques from Korea, probiotics from Bulgaria, and medicinal preparations from the Amazon were studied, standardized, and scaled. Brightseed's platform identified how compounds in traditional foods worked synergistically. Their AI showed that indigenous communities had been practicing systems medicine all along, using combinations of foods that addressed root causes rather than symptoms.
We'd been practicing reductionist medicine. The chronic disease division didn't need to develop new drugs. They needed to understand why Grandma's recipes actually worked,
admitted Samir Rodriguez, whose Merck division now focused entirely on acute care. Chapter 5. Business Model Shift. Seward, Nebraska, June 2027. The economics of healthcare inverted when Jake Wilson opened the first Heartland Mart. Working with a consortium of pharmaceutical companies that had embraced the food as health model, Jake converted an abandoned Kroger into something unprecedented, a grocery store where every product was designed for health optimization. The business model was revolutionary. Instead of making money on volume, they made money on outcomes. Customers paid a monthly membership, $99 for individuals, $249 for families, which included personalized nutrition guidance and discounts tied to health improvements. The store's AI didn't tell you what to buy. It simply made sure everything available was beneficial.
We eliminated choice paralysis. In a regular grocery store, there are 50 types of bread, and maybe 2 are actually good for you. In our store, all 8 types of bread are optimized for different health needs. You can't make a bad choice,
Jake explained. Food companies loved it because there was a new value proposition. Pharmaceutical companies loved it because it solved their biggest problem: adherence. When medication was integrated into delicious food, compliance reached 95%. Insurance companies loved it because claims dropped 60% within the first year. Customers loved it because they felt better without having to become nutrition experts. And the US GDP responded as the healthcare line item dropped by 50%, saving trillions. People were already paying for food and now they were getting prevention for free. The model spread like wildfire. Within 6 months, there were 50 Heartland Marts across the Midwest. The big chains scrambled to copy it, but they couldn't replicate the key ingredient: trust. Chapter 6. Human Stories. McAllen, Texas, September 2027. The transformation played out differently for each individual, revealing the nuanced relationship between food and pharmaceutical intervention. Maria Gonzalez, the teacher who had struggled with diabetes, represented the 50% whose chronic conditions disappeared almost entirely through food. The Heartland Mart program didn't require medication, just consistent access to foods rich in the compounds her body needed, and access to a lifestyle medicine nutrition navigator. And next door, the Health Spital offered her the companion lifestyle medicine clinical support as needed.
The bread contained resistant starch that indigenous peoples in Mexico had been using for centuries. The eggs came from chickens fed flax and chia, practices from ancient Aztec farming. My morning coffee was enhanced with adaptogenic mushrooms that Chinese medicine had used for millennia. I wasn't taking medicine, I was eating history,
she explained. But for Marcus Thompson's nephew, who had severe type 1 diabetes, food alone wasn't enough. This is where the collaboration between pharma and food became crucial with a lifestyle medicine board certified clinician. His intensive therapeutic lifestyle treatment combined traditional insulin, now made by acute care divisions, with a sophisticated array of fermented foods, specialized probiotics, and targeted peptides that helped his remaining beta cells function better.
Food solved the majority of chronic disease in those that were already on the path. For the remaining who needed more, we needed pharmaceutical expertise applied to natural compounds. Not synthetic drugs, but concentrated, standardized versions of what nature provides. Think of it as the difference between eating willow bark and taking aspirin. Same compound, different delivery.
Dr. Elena Vasquez explained. The collaboration wasn't pharma conquering food, but rather a recognition that both industries had complementary expertise. Farmers understood soil and growth. Food companies understood taste and distribution. Pharmaceutical companies understood analysis and standardization. Indigenous communities understood which combinations worked. Together, they created solutions neither could achieve alone. Detroit's transformation showed this clearly. The city's medicinal gardens grew plants selected by Native American healers, analyzed by pharmaceutical scientists, and distributed through grocery infrastructure. Crime didn't just drop because people were healthier. It dropped because three previously competing sectors and cultures were now working together, creating jobs and purpose. Chapter 7. Resistance and Adaptation. Washington, D.C., February 2028. The Empire struck back, but their weapons were obsolete. PBMs tried litigation, claiming pharmaceutical companies were violating distribution agreements. But judges couldn't understand why middlemen deserved protection when they added no value. They tried lobbying, but congressmen who had Heartland Marts in their districts saw constituent health improving, economies bursting back to life, and healthcare costs dropping. The pivotal moment came during Senate hearings when CVS Caremark's CEO tried to defend the PBM model. Senator Lisa Martinez held up an apple.
This apple from a Heartland Mart contains compounds that lower blood pressure as effectively as ACE inhibitors. It costs 50 cents. The ACE inhibitor through your system costs $180 per month. Can you explain why we should preserve your business model?
Senator Martinez asked. The CEO stammered about managing complexity and ensuring safety. But everyone in the room knew the truth. Complexity was their product. When food became medicine and medicine became food, complexity disappeared. United Health Group made a desperate pivot, trying to buy Heartland Mart.
You spent 50 years profiting from reversible conditions. You can't just buy your way into wellness. You had your chance when the food industry failed. But instead, you stood back and saw it as an opportunity to build an empire.
Jake Wilson's response became legendary. Instead, the old giants crumbled. Express Scripts filed for bankruptcy in March 2028. OptumRx was broken up by antitrust authorities. CVS closed 7,000 stores in 6 months. And the parent entities that relied on the PBM revenue to stay afloat had no fallback plan. Even the health insurance model was completely redesigned and looked nothing like it had the previous decade. The S&P 500 healthcare sector lost $2 trillion in value. But from the ashes, new models emerged. Forward-thinking insurance companies transformed into life extension services, using AI from companies like Lumeris to predict and prevent health issues decades in advance.
We profit when you live longer,
their new motto. John Fryer made a great move by leapfrogging the market with their AI primary care tool, TOM, at a time when most were still fighting about whether AI belonged in clinical care delivery instead of when and how. Chapter 8. The Scaling Moment. Cupertino, California, September 2029. The acceleration point wasn't a dramatic product launch, but a subtle shift in how technology served health. Apple announced that iOS 18 would include nutritional support, not another app, but an invisible layer that enhanced every food decision without requiring conscious thought. Your phone didn't tell you what to eat. It simply made sure healthy options appeared first in delivery apps, that recipes matched your metabolic needs, and that grocery lists optimized for both health and taste.
The best technology is invisible. You shouldn't have to think about health. It should just happen,
Jerry Tripp explained. The integration was seamless. When you walked into a Heartland Mart, your phone automatically connected with the store's systems. Shelf tags subtly highlighted products that matched your needs, not with garish alerts, but with gentle color shifts that your brain processed subconsciously. The products you needed seemed to glow slightly brighter. Amazon took a different approach with their acquisition of the defunct Rite Aid chain. They converted stores into dark kitchens that prepared personalized meals using medicinal ingredients. You didn't order specific dishes. You simply set health goals, and meals appeared at your door that moved you toward them. Google's contribution was making the science accessible. Their AI could explain exactly why a particular tomato variety helped with inflammation, but it did so only when asked. Most people didn't need to understand the mechanism, they just needed to trust that it worked. The scaling happened through trust, not technology. When your neighbor's diabetes reversed, when your colleague's arthritis disappeared, when your parents' cognitive decline halted, that's when you believed. The technology just made it easier to act on that belief. Chapter 9. System Effects. Des Moines, Iowa, October 2030. The cascade effects transformed every connected system in ways nobody had anticipated. Agriculture underwent the most dramatic shift. The USDA, which had spent a century optimizing for yield, restructured entirely around nutritional density. Subsidies shifted from commodity crops to medicinal varietals. The Farm Bill of 2030 didn't mention bushels or acres. It measured success in nutrient density per dollar.
My grandfather maximized bushels per acre. My father maximized dollars per bushel. I maximize health per bite.
Quentin Keneally, the fifth-generation farmer from Tekema, Nebraska, captured the transformation. Medical education reformed completely. Harvard Medical School, partnering with the Culinary Institute of America, launched the first MD/culinary degree. Students learned that prescribing recipes was more effective than prescribing pills. The restaurant industry split into two tiers. Fast food chains that couldn't adapt disappeared. McDonald's, in a shocking pivot, partnered with Johnson & Johnson to create McHealth, drive-through locations serving personalized medicinal meals in under 3 minutes.
Billions healed,
their new slogan. But the most profound change was in food manufacturing. Companies like General Mills and Kraft Heinz transformed from processed food companies into nutritional technology firms. They didn't just remove harmful ingredients, they engineered beneficial ones. Every product became a delivery system for health. The CPG industry, led by innovators using Brightseed's platform, developed 10,000 new products in 3 years. Cookies that actively improved gut health. Sodas that enhanced cognitive function. Chips that reduced inflammation. The junk food aisle became the functional food aisle. Chapter 10. Industry Transformation. Newark, New Jersey, March 2031. The pharmaceutical industry had completed its Great Divergence. Companies either became acute care specialists or food pharma hybrids. There was no middle ground.
We're doubling our investment in mRNA technology, gene therapy, and precision oncology. These are areas where pharmaceutical intervention remains irreplaceable. We're leaving chronic disease to the food system where it belongs,
CEO Samir Rodriguez explained as Merck announced they would focus entirely on cancer, rare diseases, and emergency medicine. Their acute care division thrived, developing breakthrough treatments for previously incurable conditions. cancer survival rates reached 85%. Gene therapy cured sickle cell disease. Emergency medicine became so advanced that trauma deaths fell 60%. Meanwhile, Pfizer's chronic disease division merged with Unilever to create Vitality Foods, using pharmaceutical development technology to improve food formulation. With AI having reduced development costs to 5% of previous levels, they could rapidly iterate on shelf-stable, nutrient-dense foods that prevented disease.
We've reimagined food science by applying pharmaceutical rigor with a focus on mitochondrial health, not to create drugs, but to ensure that a can of soup delivers consistent therapeutic compounds after 6 months on a shelf,
explained their chief scientist. The most innovative merger was Novo Nordisk with Yakult, creating the world's largest fermented foods and probiotics company. They didn't develop new drugs for diabetes. They developed fermented foods that prevented it entirely. Their products contained naturally occurring peptides, amino acids, and prebiotics that restored metabolic health. Indigenous tribes formed a new venture that became one of the top players by offering traditional medicinal plants and formulations from their elders that were virtually extinct to play a pivotal role in reversing chronic disease. Sean Terry, the Secretary of Health for the Muskogee Creek Nation, was the visionary behind it. Johnson & Johnson split into 3 companies: J&J Acute focusing on surgery and emergency care, J&J HealthSpan merged with Nestle for food-based health, and J&J Consumer for over-the-counter remedies using traditional plant medicines. The regulatory landscape had transformed completely. The FDA's new chronic disease prevention category required only safety testing. Efficacy was determined by real-world outcomes tracked through aggregated health data. This created a Darwinian market where only products that actually worked survived. Small companies flourished in this environment. A startup using Amazonian plant medicines could reach market in 6 months instead of 6 years. Indigenous communities partnered with tech companies to scale traditional remedies. The playing field had leveled, and innovation exploded. Chapter 11: Global Impact. Geneva, Switzerland, December 2032. America's transformation triggered a global revolution that reshaped geopolitics. Japan, inspired by Heartland Marts' success, converted their entire food system in 18 months. They didn't just copy the model, they improved it, integrating traditional fermentation techniques that enhanced bioavailability of therapeutic compounds. Life expectancy jumped to 92 years. China took a more authoritarian approach, mandating that all food meet therapeutic standards by 2034. They converted the Gobi Desert into the world's largest medicinal farming operation, using Israeli water technology and American soil science. Their diabetes rate fell from 12% to 2% in 4 years. Europe initially resisted, with France particularly outraged at the idea of engineering traditional foods. But when French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi demonstrated that you could enhance wine with cardioprotective compounds without changing the taste, resistance crumbled. The EU launched Food Pharmacy 2035, converting the entire continent's agricultural system. Africa leapfrogged traditional development entirely. Rwanda, working with the Gates Foundation and reformed pharma companies, built a food system from scratch that integrated nutrition and medicine from day one. They achieved lower disease rates than Europe without ever building a traditional pharmaceutical industry. The World Health Organization declared 2033 the year health won. For the first time in human history, health span was increasing faster than lifespan. People weren't just living longer, they were living better. Chapter 12: Epilogue: View from the Future. Heartland Mart. Store number 1, Seward, Nebraska, October 15, 2038. Sarah Chen stood where it all began, in the store that had revolutionized American health. Jake Wilson, now 65 but looking 45, gave her a tour of the latest innovations.
See that section? Every item there is genetically optimized to address specific health conditions. But customers don't need to know that. They just know the food tastes good and makes them feel better.
He pointed to what looked like an ordinary produce display. The store was busy but calm. Families shopped without checking phones or consulting apps. Children reached for snacks that happened to enhance cognitive function. Elderly customers selected meals that happened to preserve muscle mass. Health had become effortless.
Remember when we thought we needed to track everything? Steps, calories, blood markers? Turns out when you fix the food system, the body fixes itself.
Tom Mitchell, the former insurance actuary who now ran HealthShift's global operations, joined them. They walked past the memorial wall, photos of the last PBM executives, not in mockery, but in remembrance of a system that had to die for a better one to be born. Among them was a plaque with a quote from the last CEO of CVS Caremark.
"We managed complexity because we created complexity. When they made health simple, we became obsolete."
The plaque read. Outside, school buses were arriving for the daily field trip. Children would learn to cook, garden, and understand how food became health. They would grow up in a world where prevention wasn't a concept but a default, where medicine wasn't separate from meals but integrated into them.
We spent a century building a healthcare system. We should have been building a health system. The difference isn't semantic, it's existential.
Elena Vasquez, now Secretary of Health Optimization, had said it best in her confirmation hearing. Standing in that grocery store, watching families select food that would prevent diseases their grandparents had died from, Sarah understood the true revolution. They hadn't just disrupted pharmaceutical distribution or destroyed the PBMs. They had fundamentally changed humanity's relationship with health. The last prescription had been written not because medicine had failed, but because it had finally succeeded in making itself unnecessary. The age of treatment was over. The age of optimization had begun. And it all started with a simple realization. The best medicine isn't found in a pharmacy. It's grown in healthy soil, prepared with wisdom, and shared with love. Everything else was just complexity getting in the way of that simple truth. A restatement of our disclaimer. This is a future cast, a fictional exploration of one possible future based on current trends and emerging technologies. While the companies and technologies mentioned are real, the events described are speculative fiction intended to help visualize potential outcomes. Like any forward-looking statement, actual results may vary significantly. This is not investment advice, predictive analysis, or a guarantee of future events. Consider it a thought experiment in what could be possible if current innovations in pharmaceutical distribution, food, agriculture, and health converge in transformative ways.